Until recently, I lived with my parents in a private house. They were always strict and had difficult personalities, so we almost never had guests. The only friend of mine they could get along with a little was Alex. I've known him since first grade, and he was probably the only person I could completely trust in a tough situation. Unlike my parents, who preferred to scold me for mistakes rather than teach me how to avoid them, Alex was always ready to help. He had way more life experience than I did. He grew up without a father, worked since he was 14, and even managed to date girls. The only bad thing was that his mom was an alcoholic. She spent half her money on booze and used the other half to buy food for Alex. But he had something I could only dream of as a kid: freedom. A year after he turned 18, his mom passed away, and the apartment became his. A week ago, he came over in the evening. My parents had gone to the theater, so we had the house to ourselves for the next 3 hours. We weren't thinking about throwing any parties because we knew what that could lead to. There was no point in having them at Alex's place either. Even though I was already 19, my dad was strongly against me spending the night anywhere but home. So when Alex suggested the idea of buying a cheap apartment on the outskirts of the city, I was all for it. That sounds great, Alex, but saving up for an apartment from my pocket money seems impossible. I doubt I could afford a decent place, I said. You can, Alex smiled. Not just a decent one, but a new one in a new building. Then why not a house? My voice sounded disappointed. I'm serious, Alex said firmly. I've got a plan. My neighbor recently did something similar, and now he's living the dream. Look, your savings are enough for an apartment in an old 5-story building on the outskirts. The foundation was laid poorly, the building is settled, and now there's a crack along the wall. Mold is growing, and the heating's been cut off. The building's been declared unsafe and is scheduled for demolition under a new program. The residents will be relocated to new buildings. Get where I'm going with this? And the owner is some rich guy who doesn't care about the apartment, so he'll sell it for next to nothing. And if you're short on money, we can lend you the rest, he smiled. But you have to hurry. Soon they'll ban buying apartments before the demolition. You're telling me to live in a dump where the roof could collapse on my head at any moment? Come on, Alex said. You'll only be there for less than a month. It won't collapse that fast. And once you're relocated, we'll throw such an amazing housewarming party. How's that for motivation? I told him I'd think about it and give him my decision the next day. I needed to discuss it with my parents, and if they agreed, I'd have to mentally prepare myself for the purchase. The conversation was long. I presented tons of arguments and explained Alex's plan several times. After a while, my mom finally supported me, and then my dad did too. I was thrilled, and the next day, I happily went to see Alex. The apartment was being sold for a bit less than what I had saved up. My family was quite wealthy. My parents were generous with pocket money, and I was modest and good at saving. Plus, I had nowhere to spend it, except maybe to treat Alex at a cafe or buy myself new clothes once a year. I also used my savings from lousy part-time jobs. Over the past year, I had been doing various gigs with Alex on weekends to escape my parents' control. The seller turned out to be a reasonable young guy, just a bit older than Alex and me. He had inherited the apartment from a grandmother he never knew, so he had no attachment to the place and put it up for sale as soon as he could. The apartment was on the 4th floor. The iron front door stood out against the shabby, graffiti-covered walls, but inside was an even worse sight. The place reeked of something awful. In some spots, the wallpaper was peeling off in chunks, and instead of the usual chandeliers, the rooms were dimly lit by bare bulbs hanging from dusty black sockets on creepy wires. In the corner of the kitchen window was a crack covered with tape. In the living room was a sagging couch where the old lady had died. We quickly folded it up and covered it with a sheet. In the smaller room were a wardrobe, a bed, and a nightstand. Well, it's livable, Alex smiled. Can't I just stay at your place? I asked, staring at the dirty linoleum in the room. The apartment is in my name, so I'll get relocated either way. I don't actually have to live here. Thing is, he hesitated, I'm not living alone. Remember Annie from the second group? It all became clear. I'd have to live here. At least it had all the necessary amenities, and the iron door securely shut me off from the outside world. Going back to my parents for the night wasn't an option. I didn't want to see my father's mocking grin, disappointed in my helplessness and lack of readiness for independent life. In the evening, we moved my stuff from my parents' house, and Alex went home. For dinner, all I had was tap water, so I decided to go get some groceries. It was dark when I got back, and the streetlights were on. Near my building, I noticed a silhouette. After hesitating a bit, I decided to say hello. "Who are you?" the silhouette asked. "I live here now," I stammered. The silhouette put out a cigarette and walked up to me. It was a woman, middle-aged, fairly well preserved for her age, but with a husky, smoky voice. "Laura," she extended her hand. "Carl. How long have you been here, Carl?" "Just moved in today, and you?" "My whole life." "Wow," I sighed. "Hey, have you heard they're going to demolish this building?" "Yeah, I've heard. The officials think they can just kick us out easily, promising new apartments. But they'll probably just give us a room in a dorm at best," Laura said, getting chatty. "But it's not going to happen. I'll fight for my home." "Are there many people living here?" I asked out of politeness. "No, just me and Mr. Logan. He used to serve in the military. He got this apartment after his service. Then his daughter and her family died in a car crash. And he's been alone ever since. He lives on the 5th floor." We chatted for a couple more minutes until another silhouette appeared in the dark courtyard. The person's posture was straight, and his steps were firm, but a limp in one leg and heavy breathing gave away his age. "Meet Mr. Logan, Carl," Laura nodded toward the silhouette. The man stepped into the light. It was an elderly, white-haired man. I offered him my hand, but he didn't respond. His eyes were full of concern and clearly troubled. He glanced quickly at the building's windows, then stared at me and sternly said, "Keep your doors locked at night." "Doors?" I asked, confused. The old man didn't answer and hurried up the stairs. Laura and I exchanged looks. It felt eerie. After a while, we both went to our apartments. His warning about the doors puzzled me. That night, I tightly locked the iron door and the wooden one leading to my room. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, my mind racing with thoughts about the new place, and I couldn't shake the old man from my head. "He's just senile," I thought to myself, and relaxed. That night, I was woken up by noise from the apartment above, like someone was moving heavy furniture across the floor. Then footsteps, a loud crash. The final straw was the sharp sound of glass shattering on the floor. I got up from bed and knocked on the radiator. Everything went quiet. The rest of the night passed peacefully. In the morning, before heading to college, I ran into Laura outside the building and politely asked about the apartment above mine. She smiled and said, "That's Mr. Logan's apartment. I told you, it's just the two of us left here." Definitely senile, extreme case moving furniture, I thought, and smiled back before heading off to class. The day went on as usual. After class, I dropped by Alex's place. He introduced me to Annie, and I stayed at their place until the evening. I came home late, already under the streetlights. Laura was standing outside again. "How was your day, Laura?" I smiled at her. She didn't answer, just gave me a frightened look. "Something happened?" "Carl, I don't know." Her voice trembled. Almost stuttering with fear, she continued, "I just got back from work, was standing here smoking, and then I looked at my window and the light was on." She swallowed hard and exhaled. "Then it just went off. Could someone be in there?" "Come on," I smiled. "This building's older than both of us combined. The wiring's probably just acting up. Want me to check it out?" "If it's not too much trouble," she said, a little calmer now, and handed me the keys. I cursed myself for this, but it was too late to back out. I had a pepper spray with me, which gave me a bit of confidence. The door to Laura's apartment was closed. With a trembling hand, I turned the key, walked in, and quickly turned on the light in the hallway. No one was there. I checked the kitchen, then the living room and bedroom. Empty. I opened the window in the kitchen and called out to Laura. She looked up, smiled with relief, and walked into the building. She offered to have some tea and hang out at her place, but I politely declined and went back to my apartment. About an hour passed. I was sitting at my laptop watching a series. The window in the room was wide open, so I could hear everything happening outside, whether it was the voices of passing drunks or the distant sounds of cars. Suddenly, I heard a woman scream. Startled, I jumped up and looked out the window. No one was there. Another scream. This time I realized it was coming from inside our building. Everything clicked in my head, and a cold chill washed over me. My body felt like one big block of ice. It could only be Laura screaming, I thought. But who could hurt her? I didn't hear anyone enter the building, unless no one entered. Oh God, someone was inside already. But where? I checked everything. Then I froze for a moment. My eyes widened so much it felt like they might pop out and I couldn't breathe. I didn't check the bathroom. A horrible thought entered my mind and wouldn't let go. When I came to my senses, I quickly turned off the light in my room, grabbed my phone, and stood by the window, hiding behind the curtain, so I could see who left the building, and if necessary, identify the culprit for the police. I called 911. The dispatcher said a squad was already on the way. The police car arrived in 10 minutes. I was surprised at how fast they came and relieved because no one had left the building all that time. 3 officers ran into the building while one stayed outside. I waved to him and told him the apartment number so the officers could take my statement. There was a knock on the door. It was 2 detectives. They wrote down everything I told them, then asked me to go to Laura's apartment. Her body was in the bathroom. A trail of blood led from the tub to the kitchen window. She probably tried to call for help. They couldn't determine the cause of death on the spot. No wounds, blood just poured from her mouth, and her nails were broken as if she had fought someone before she died. The police said they had to break in the door. It was locked and had no signs of forced entry, meaning the killer had keys and used them to get into Laura's apartment. The detective guessed the killer left through the attic, walked across the roof to another entrance, and exited through a door on the opposite side of the building from my window. The detective gave me his number and left. Laura's body was taken away shortly after. Spending the night alone was unbearably scary and emotionally tough. I called Alex and asked him to come over. He was scared too, but he came. The night went on as usual. We went to bed late. Around 4 in the morning, I heard the familiar noise, a quiet voice, and loud footsteps like an old man started jumping in place. 5 minutes later, it stopped, and I fell asleep. At breakfast, Alex shared his thoughts on the sleepover. Not only did you make me sleep on the floor, which kept me awake half the night, but some idiot's nighttime jumping also woke me up. You heard it too? I smiled. That's my neighbor upstairs, a crazy old man. Neighbor upstairs? So, you've got a psycho living above you, and you make me come over in the middle of the night and walk up a dark staircase? What if he's the one who killed that woman? I shuddered. Horrific images flashed in my mind of the old man going down to Laura, opening the door, hiding in the bathroom, and waiting for the defenseless woman to be home alone and decide to take a shower after a long workday. Did you tell the cops about him? Alex asked. What's the point? I defended myself. They'll start questioning him, and he'll just move a nightstand in front of them. They asked me how many tenants are in the building, and I said 2. Technically, I didn't lie. He's a sick man. The first day I met him, he told me to lock my doors at night. Laura said his whole family died in a car crash, and that's when he started losing it. Well, it's up to you. Alex shrugged. He finished his coffee, pushed the cup aside, and thought for a moment. You told me yesterday that you thought the killer was hiding in the bathroom. I just realized, why did he tell you to lock your doors at night? I became wary. When you left that woman's place, Alex continued, did you hear her lock the door, like with the key? I don't remember, I admitted. Alex raised his eyebrows and stared at me eerily. Enough, I yelled. First he warns, then kills, then locks the door to make sure no one suspects him. He can barely breathe, let alone kill someone. The day went by quickly. There were only 2 classes, so I came home early. Laura's brother came by her apartment, and I met him on the landing and asked about their family. He said Laura never had a husband or kids. She was unlucky in life. He lives in another city and came here for his sister's funeral. I spent the rest of the day at home, watched a series, and went to bed early. My mood was bad. At night, the noise from upstairs woke me up again. This time, the jumping was more frequent and louder, as if someone was trying to stomp through the floor. Somehow, I managed to fall back asleep. I woke up very early, and Alex's words wouldn't leave my head. Could the old man really have done something like that? I decided to call the detective, thinking he'd ask me to come to the station, but instead he showed up an hour later. When I told him about my suspicions, he decided to question the old man and called some officers. They arrived quickly and asked me to go with them as a witness. They knocked for a long time, but Logan didn't answer. Then the detective, rubbing his tired red eyes, ordered one of the officers to break down the flimsy wooden door. Without a warrant? The officer smirked. We'll get one later, the detective grumbled. Inside was a well-kept apartment with portraits of a young Logan and his family on the walls. The detective pulled on the bedroom door handle and we walked into the room. Logan's pale body was sitting in a chair in front of a large mirror, with gray hair scattered around him, as if it had been ripped from his head, and pieces of something glass, smeared with blood, were lying on the floor. The old man's eyes were open, staring at the reflection of the door in the mirror. The dead man was looking straight at us. The detective called for an ambulance, and the old man was taken away. I stayed home, didn't go to the university. I called Alex, but he didn't pick up. I felt lonely and scared. At night, I locked all the doors and windows, went to bed with the lamp on, and miraculously fell asleep. Dawn was breaking, and I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling and thinking. Then I suddenly heard that familiar noise again, the jumping, and the quick running in the apartment upstairs. Now he's doing morning jogs, I thought. It took me a few seconds to realize what was going on. I almost suffocated from fear, jumped out of bed, and with trembling hands dialed the police. Time seemed to stretch on forever. When the noise finally stopped, I heard the police car pull up outside. They searched the apartment. No one was there. An officer agreed to stay with me until I left. I got dressed quickly. In a panic, I even forgot where I'd thrown my phone. On the way to Alex's, the detective told me the results of the old man's autopsy. It turned out he'd been dead for at least 3 days. That means he was killed the night he warned me about the doors. Feeling empty, I arrived at Alex's place and waited in his yard until evening. When Alex got home from college, we decided to take 3 of our friends with us to grab my remaining things from the apartment. The streetlights were coming on as we approached the building, and it was clearly a bad idea to go in the evening. Near the entrance, I glanced up at my windows. The light came on for a moment and then went out. I almost fainted. I don't even remember how we got back home. Alex says I was yelling at everyone to get away from that building and run. Now I'm living with Alex, waiting for the house to be demolished. It's no longer my problem.